everybody, just wanted to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Genuine Fantasy Press. Genuine Fantasy Press is giving away a free version of their new book, The Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening, at genuinefantasypress.com. This book's for 5th edition D&D, and if you play a warlock, you should get this. It contains 34 new subclasses, 17 new warlock patrons and familiars, over 175 new spells and invocations, plus 10 new races, and it's all for free, 125 pages. If that entices you to go buy the 190-page copy with new content, you as a GM are going to be so thrilled to get dozens of campaign hooks and a book that is designed to work with both classic and homebrew settings. It gives you new ideas for your world and game, and it's filled with beautiful full-color artwork. Plus, it's available internationally in hardcover at Amazon. It makes an awesome holiday gift. Go check it out at genuinefantasypress.com. Genuine Fantasy Press, inspiring adventure. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I have an amazing guest, Chris Spivey, who is the creator of Harlem Unbound. We are going to be talking all about the Emmy Award-winning game and his experiences as a role player. He gives amazing conversation. I can't wait to talk more with him, and I can't wait for you to hear this interview, so I won't make you wait anymore. Okay, everybody, now I am here with Chris Spivey, an amazing game designer. Chris, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Well, you've already said it, but my name is Chris Spivey. I'm the mastermind, writer, developer, and general hype man for a little game called Harlem Unbound. It won 3 gold Ennies this year. It's in multiple museums. It's being taught in universities. There's a soapbox I could get off of, but I'm kind of happy on it for the moment. Other than that, I'm really focused on trying to promote diversity in gaming and creating opportunities for other diverse voices.
Absolutely. It is super important that we bring more people into this hobby and really into all aspects of life. And I think being a promoter of diversity and being welcoming of different people and different games and different ideas and different thoughts is huge. So I'm super excited to have you on because I am going to sit back and listen to some great thinking and some great things that you have done. But first, take me all the way back. When did you first lay hands on a tabletop role-playing game, and what did you play?
I was around 6 or 7, and my friend Jay and I saved up all of our pennies, and we eventually went and bought the red box set, the Sacred D&D red box set, and we got it back. And I made my very first character, and I believe the first thing I ever played was an elf.
That's awesome. Yeah, that red box is a lot of people's first experience of D&D. And then, at some point you go from playing the red box and playing other role-playing games to creating your own. When did you make that shift? Was it a conscious thing? Did you just sort of fall into it? How did you become a professional game designer?
Well, my first game that I ever made, I was 15 actually, and I sort of reverse engineered Stormbringer into a low magic mystical African setting and sort of created my own campaign game.
Wow, that's awesome. So what was, when you were 15, you were already hacking apart and designing your own systems. What made you want to do that?
A lot of it was because I didn't really see a lot of representation like myself. And I was gaming already even at 15 for so long that I wanted to try to make something that would represent me and I could share that with some of my friends.
Nice. Yeah, that's really awesome. And that's sort of what you've done with Harlem Unbound. I think that's fair to say. Tell me a little bit about Harlem Unbound. What is it?
So Harlem Unbound sort of spawns out of my love for the Harlem Renaissance, my cousin Zora Neale Hurston, and my enjoyment of Lovecraft's work, but not the man himself. So I took the two and I sort of melded them together, and I wanted to address Lovecraft's racism, the racism in society, and in gaming somewhat. And so I took all Lovecraft's ideas and I flipped them on their head by making the protagonist of the game minorities, either immigrants, LGBTQ, African American, primarily African American, because I'm trying to tell it somewhat from my own perspective. And so even when you read through the book, the default setting for all the characters is black. And if someone is of a different race, it is specifically called out. Like you'll see the the white trash man, which normally in a game you might see like the black bus driver or the black lawyer. And so it's little things like that in the book that I'm trying to like reinforce the idea and establish what the norm is in gaming as it is in our society.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I think there's something about Harlem Unbound that I think has really gotten into the zeitgeist. Obviously, it's a great game. That Gumshoe engine is really fun, and I think you've done some really wonderful things with it. But there's also this idea that role-playing games, we see a lot of white dudes, right, playing role-playing games. So it's cool to see this world where it's like the default assumption isn't that you're, a Conan the Barbarian looking dude or a stubbly white detective who is, in 1920s New York. No, this is sort of the default assumption, is that you're in Harlem and there's African American themes and characters going on, and if it's not, it's getting called out because that's not the norm. I thought that was really cool, and for me, because I'm a white dude, to read that, it was like, oh, okay, this is great because I'm getting this different perspective. Was that part of your hope that people who are not African American would pick up the role-playing game and also get your perspective on things?
Yes, I didn't want to make something just for one person. I want to make something for everybody because gaming is sort of, well, I hate to use this analogy, but it's kind of like a virus because you as a keeper, you're sitting there, you're running a game, and you're projecting those ideas out to all these other people. And then all those people that are playing the game take those ideas and they tell it to someone else. And so they're making contact and it's spreading out in ripples. And one of my hopes was that regardless of race, gender, creed, and everything else, you'll pick up Harlem Unbound because it looks stunning with the cover art by Britton Reese. And you'll read through the book. You may agree or disagree with me, but you'll talk about it. And that conversation is what we need to have. And it doesn't work if only one person reads it and they only want to have that talk with themselves.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really great perspective on it. There's a lot to love, and I am not a big Cthulhu fan, partially because of the man that Cthulhu was, right? Or Cthulhu. Obviously, no one's a big fan of the man Cthulhu is, but the man that H.P. Lovecraft was. He definitely had some, to put it lightly, problematic views on race and gender and sex.
They were even obscene for his time.
Yeah, yeah. So talk about this idea. You said you're taking his work, you're flipping it on its head. So I take it you are a fan of some of the Cthulhu mythos, as it were.
Yes. So I first actually encountered Lovecraft's work not through gaming, but through his actual writing itself. So in Alabama, they're probably everywhere, but we have these things called estate sales, which people go, they sit in your house, they sort of like box up all your belongings, and eventually they sell them off and whatnot. But they hired a group of us kids, we're around 14 to 16. And there were 6 of us. So we went in the house, we did all the boxing, and we all had to crash there for the night because we still had more work to do. And one of the things that was in the house was this complete works of H.P. Lovecraft. And so there I am, sitting in a sleeping bag with my flashlight. All my friends are asleep in this dead person's house, reading this cosmic horror about the hopelessness, the hopeless struggle of mankind and how insignificant we are. And being a smart black kid in Alabama, there's an extra layer that's associated with that. That even though he wasn't necessarily trying to speak to me and was actually probably speaking negatively about me, my situation, or actually the situation of most minorities in the country, there's some sort of reflection in that you can take away. And so the concept of the cosmic horror, this all encompassing oppressive force that's always pushing you down, spoke to me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. And then, I think we see Cthulhu in a lot of games, right? We see a lot of Cthulhu mythos, specifically in like the you're a detective in New York kind of thing. So what makes Harlem Unbound different?
For one, the Harlem Renaissance itself was this great time of political, social change and movement through arts, politics, people actively working together. And it wasn't free of racism or oppression, but it was a place where you could go and there's a higher likelihood that you'd find success or you'd be treated with some modicum of respect. If you're a black person walking down the street, you wouldn't have to step off of the sidewalk to let a white person walk past you. It's that sort of vibe that's there to it. It has that hope that's riding throughout the entire decade of the Renaissance. So all of that hope and sort of the black movement itself, coupled with the oppressive horror of the mythos and the racism of Lovecraft, is just something that needed to be done. Even now, talking about it in retrospect, I still get excited just going into it.
That's really cool. It's one of those things where I was like, I picked it up expecting a role-playing game and expecting a well-crafted role-playing game. But as I was reading it, it was wow, this is incredibly thoughtful. And this is something that is making me feel like I needed it in my life, which is a really interesting thing, right? Coming to it again, as somebody who is not African-American, it was like, wow, this is exciting. This is a game that I really want to play. And it is a game that uses some pretty cool mechanics as well. And I was wondering if you could talk about sort of the mechanical end going with what you envision as, the story of Harlem Unbound.
So when I first came up with it, I wanted to make sure that it was for Call of Cthulhu, but I also wanted it to be its own game system. And I actually had the great fortune of meeting Robin Laws, and I got to know Robin. So then I really got into Gumshoe after meeting Robin, and I met Simon and Kat. And I wanted to use the open OGL for Gumshoe so that the game itself is an entire system. So you don't need anything else for Harlem Unbound to play. But at the same time, I wanted it to be part of the Call of Cthulhu family. And so I talked to Mike and Jeff, and I sort of pitched them on the idea, and I got to become a licensee. And it's also a Call of Cthulhu supplement. So you can use all of the great Call of Cthulhu books that have been generated for 7th edition, or you can use all of the great Gumshoe work that's out there too. You sort of have your choice.
And how deadly would you say this game is? Cthulhu games tend to lean heavier towards the mortal end of the spectrum for player characters.
This game is probably deadlier than your standard Cthulhu game because
wow.
one of the big things is in a normal Cthulhu game, it's assumed you're white, and if worse comes to worse, you call the police, and the police will eventually show up. Maybe they'll save some of your friends and you. But in this game, calling the police could be deadlier than combating the mythos entity by yourself.
That's really heavy and awesome. So I think that's a really good way to put it. So I took some questions from people from Twitter, and Hamza Kazmi, who is a friend of this show, wanted to know, as Harlem Unbound gears up for its 2nd edition, what are some of the biggest lessons you learned from creating the 1st edition?
That I don't have to handle shipping. Chaosium's doing all of that. I'm still learning about shipping, and that was the biggest bane of the entire thing. But a more book-related sort of thing is that there is so much history, and I had to cut out parts of history I wanted to put in. And with the new edition, I get to add in a little bit more of that history that I really wanted to get in.
Oh, wow. That sort of flows into his second question, which is what pieces of history surprised and grabbed you the most while you were researching for the game?
One of the new things that we're putting in, I think it was the Sandhogs, which is basically this integrated group of potentially Italian people, Jewish people, Irish people, African Americans, and they all have to go under Harlem and work and dig tunnels and things like that. Like, that is something I didn't know about before, but I found it, and Sarah Hood, who is handling some of that, scooped that out and was like, look at this. And then there was that entire geek out moment on the Slack. Everyone's like, holy crap, that's awesome.
Why are they going and digging tunnels?
They're working for the city. I would tell you more, but you'd have to buy the book.
Oh, Oh, nice, nice. That's awesome. That's really cool. So, what about some of the responses you have gotten? This is from Tainted Dingo, which is a great Twitter name. Wants to know, what are some of the best responses you've gotten on Harlem Unbound from the players and GMs that have made it worth your while or surprised you?
Before I go into that, I'm curious if they're related to the dingoes that ate my baby. All right, Buffy joke, had to do it. So one of my favorite ones that actually came across a few weeks ago was someone's introducing gaming into their class. It's an advanced AP class, and they had this one young lady that wasn't engaging or interested in any of the books. They brought D&D, they brought some other stuff, and she wasn't having any of it. And the teacher went up to her and said, "Hey, I've also got this thing called Harlem Unbound." And she started to perk up, and they showed her the book. And when she read it, she instantly engaged with the entire class. Like, to be able to go and change someone's entire perspective in a classroom in that instant. That's just what I want.
Wow, that is really cool. That's incredible. So, as you are looking at changing more perspectives through gaming, what makes you think gaming is a good tool for that?
Sort of what I touched on earlier. I'll move away from the virus and go with ripples. Gaming has a ripple effect to it. That one person can take that idea and promote it out to unknown legions of people, because they'll go to their own group. Their group might have 4 or 5 people. They game. Those people leave. Maybe 2 of them will talk to some of their friends about it. But then you've got those 2 people that talk to their friends, so maybe 3 or 4 other people. And it constantly goes on. And you're spreading your idea and teaching people. And it's not in a structured, this is history, this is what you should know, this is the important parts. This is more people seeing that history is there. They take their own creativity and they engage with that history. And that has buy-in to it. And that's someone that's saying, hey, I played this black activist in Harlem. I got roughed up by the police. I stopped the deep ones, and they want to go and they want to read about Harlem, or they identify a little bit more with someone that's different than them. And that's what I'm going for. Gaming does that because it has their passion associated with my passion.
Yeah, do you think the fact that people literally are stepping into roles, right, in a role-playing game has I think that's so powerful, right? Like the idea that hey, you can be anything. You can be something that you're not. You can be heroic. You can be fat or thin or whatever you want to be when you are in this role-playing game has a lot of potential beyond like we could be muscly dudes with swords or people shooting fireballs, right? Which is also fun. Also very, very fun.
It is. And people remember those things. Like, I still remember one of my favorite characters, which is my Shadowrun character from a high school game that I played for 4 years. And whenever I think about it, I want to tell people about it. And so that is what I wanted to tap into. And I think that I've done that.
So, with the second edition coming, are you looking at revising or adding any new mechanics?
There will be no new mechanics added, but the book itself on the whole will be, every single section is going to be edited, revised, and almost every single section of the book is being updated. For instance, the history chapter has been expanded another 2,000 odd words. And I just mentioned Sarah, who is working on some of the different people and organizations, and I talked a little bit about the Sandhogs. That's a new addition. I've also tapped some new writers, and there may be a couple of new scenarios in the book.
So it's basically more of everything, is what I'm hearing you say.
If you bought the first edition, you'll definitely want to get the second edition, because there's going to be enough differences and enough awesomeness in it that it will be good to have both.
That's really, really cool. So I want to talk a little bit about your mission to increase diversity in gaming. First, how's it going? How, on a whole, do you think gaming is making a shift? And do you think it's making the shift fast enough?
I'll answer the last part of your question first. No, it is not making the shift fast enough. This is something that should have been done decades ago. But on the actual mission itself, moving now, it's mixed. It's moving. It's not moving fast enough for me, but I don't think it would unless it automatically is fixed and everyone is happy now.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. What do you think people are doing, or what can people do to sort of help with the overall mission of making gaming a great place for everybody.
Even if you don't have the money to go out and buy diverse people's products or anything else like that, retweet them, like share them on Facebook, talk about them, because every single person that you push out their stuff to, that's one more person that says, hey, I didn't know there was a person that did this one random thing. Because on Twitter, if you look, a lot of people say, I'm looking for minority creatives. I don't know of any. And they might have 10,000 followers. And then someone will go, hey, what about like this 20 people or these like 10 people? And they'll say, I've never heard of any of them. And that one little retweet by that 10,000 followed person is monumental to someone that's trying to make a name for themselves in the industry.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I feel that as a creator, right? Whenever somebody with a lot of followers retweets what I'm doing, it gets a ton of love, it gets a ton of eyeballs, and that sort of thing. I used to joke, Sly Flourish, who does a lot of D&D things, Mike Shea, has a podcast on this network now. When I was first starting out, I always talked about the Sly Flourish bump, because whenever he would retweet something, I would see the hits go way, way up and get lots of comments and people actually reading and talking about it.
Don't go anywhere. There's more tabletop babble coming up.
At the center of the great forest, on an island in the sky, the crow, deer, and wolf clans have been training 3 fearsome warriors from infancy for one purpose: to protect and serve the goddess of Estra.
So how exactly are we going to do that? Protecting the goddess, I mean.
Fran lies down.
Leica can't answer because she's too busy sniffing both your butts.
Okay, back off, Wolf Clan.
This disturbs me, but not to worry, I will instantly repress it.
These are the guardians of the goddess. Leica, the tiefling paladin who hails from the wolf clan.
Nobody's touching one beautiful hair on the goddess's head as long as I'm around.
Corbin, a human druid from the crow clan.
Human! I'm a crow!
And Fran, a water genasi wizard of the deer clan.
So, is there a way to quit this job or what?
This unlikely trio will venture forth into an unfamiliar world without knowing who can be trusted against the powerful dark force stalking the steps of their goddess and threatening the future of their world. Tune in every second Monday to Dames and Dragons, a 5th edition D&D actual play podcast. See ya then!
All right, back to the show.
I think when people talk about we'd love to see the hobby become more diverse, we'd love to see more diversity in the hobby, I think a lot of times people think we're talking about players and game masters and that sort of thing. But I think creators are an important part of the diversity as well, right? Like, we want to see...
That's essential.
Yeah. Talk about why is that?
Because one of the things that happens is that if someone wants to add diversity to their game, they might hire a diverse creative to write this one very specific thing that deals with whatever their gender, race, or whatever is, and that's all they want them for. And it's good that they've hired them, but that doesn't necessarily promote and put out their voice and perspective on the entire game. It's different as if we were going to do a game together, there's the 2 of us, and we might bring in 2 other people. All of us at the start of that creative process are changing it and altering and adding our perspectives to it. We're not bringing in someone on the back end. And by building a name for creatives, that lets them go out and hire other diverse voices also, and it propagates itself. But you need people that are going to step up and deal with, well, I hate to say it, but the hate that's going to come from being a diverse creative and deal with that first wave, so it's easier on everyone that comes after them.
Yeah. Do you, I see a lot of people say like so-and-so just got X job because, they are not a cishet white male, right? Do you feel a lot of that hate still, even now that you've created like award-winning, amazing games?
So at Gen Con, right after I got my gold Ennie for best writing, given to me by Mark Morrison, who for me that was huge because one of the reasons I love Cthulhu so much is because of Dead Man Stomp, and that was written by Lynn Wills and Mark Morrison. So that was sort of a great moment. They had the intermission, and I had a white guy come up to me and ask me, why am I here and why do I deserve to have that award?
Wow. Oh my God.
So literally, I'm standing here with my award in my excitement. There's a line of people behind this guy to come say, hey, great job. And he tries to spend most of that time questioning me and trying to make me defend why I should be here.
Jesus. That is insane and awful and terrible. And, one of the things that is interesting about an any, right, is the public has voted on that. That's not just an institution or that sort of thing. And those awards, I think, are also legitimate and great. But one of the cool things about an any is it's like, hey, look at all of these people who voted and they like my thing. That's awesome, right? That's really cool. So you should feel very proud. You've obviously earned what you've got going with Harlem Unbound, and that guy is a jerk.
I wish I could say that was the only incident at Gen Con, but it's not. So, yes, I still feel it, regardless of what I've done and what I've accomplished. There's still a diminishing factor, but I'm trying not to focus on that. I'm trying to focus on all those people that voted for it, all those people that backed the Kickstarter. Because when I did the Kickstarter, I was Chris Spivey. And they were like, who's Chris Spivey? This guy doesn't any games. And you'll search, and there was nothing. I didn't have any contacts. I was addressing Lovecraft and racism and all these other things in a crazy Kickstarter that no one thought would be anything.
But now, I mean, now you've realized the full product. You're working on the next iteration of it, and it's going to be really awesome. So, what can people who are creators in the industry who are trying to find, different people and different perspectives to work with, what is the best way for them to go about, like, hey, finding people? Because sometimes I get into these situations where I'm putting together a podcast. I want to have a bunch of different viewpoints, and it's like, oh no, I can only find, two women who I know who are sort of experts in this area. I know there are more out there, and these two people are unavailable. Like, I want to increase my own sort of diversity on panels and on projects that I work with people. What are great ways for creators like me to go out there and do that?
First, there's word of mouth. You can do the Twitter asking for different diverse creatives. You can also do what I like to do, which is basically you create a poll and you have questions and you ask people. And you may ask them sort of like, what their own diverse background is, or if they're a diverse creative. And then sort of ask them to explain or at least talk about their own sort of encounters and experiences, because that lets you find what you're looking for. I know, for instance, I'm doing one, actually it just closed yesterday, for the science fiction line that I'm making for Chaosium. And one of the questions was, are you a diverse creative? And there's a sort of little bar after that if you want to talk about your experiences. And I had a lot of people that would respond yes, and then they would say that I am a cis white male. Or I would have people that would say, yes, I'm an African-American creator, and these are like some of the problems I've had, and this is what I'm looking to create, and I'm really into this, and this is my vibe.
That's cool. So that's like a great way. It's almost like a pre-job interview, right?
On some extent it is, because for me, a big thing is that if you're going to go and you're going to fill it out, that means you're going to think about what I'm trying to create. And if you're interested, that's conveyed through the questions I'm asking you. If you're not interested, you can go, that sounds interesting. I will keep this guy in mind. If he does something else that I want to work on, I'll come back. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to bring you on and hire you, we're going to be working together. And we need to be feeling the same vibe, because if we're not, the work that'll reflect in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an important part of working together and working with other people, right? Is understanding each other and also having good communication and good flow. So when you assemble a team, right, like, are you working with people right now on the next iteration of Harlem Unbound?
Yeah, I've got most of the old crew back and some new voices too.
Nice. That's awesome.
And I love to do it all via Slack. So the Slack, so everyone can see what we're talking about, and they can all sort of add their own special sauce in, and we can figure out what we really like. And people's depth of knowledge is incredible. But if they don't see what you're talking about, they don't necessarily know what to add in or how to add it in.
What is your collaborative process then like with all of those people? So you're in Slack, everybody's sort of adding their secret sauce. Talk to me a little bit about the process of everything coming together for a big project like this, because writing a role-playing game is no small feat.
Actually, doing the revised version, I think, is harder than doing no version, V1.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
Because when you're making changes to it, it's sort of like you're amputating part of your baby, and then you're like welding on cybernetic limbs, and you're trying to figure out which limb is the best limb. Maybe that cybernetic eye to see in the dark is better than to these eyes over here.
That's incredible. So putting that all together, then what is that process like? You're in Slack, you're exchanging ideas, but then what's the next step?
My style is fairly laid back. Normally up front, I say, "Hey, this is sort of what I'm thinking. These are our deadline dates. If you have a problem with deadline dates, let me know as soon as possible." Because for me, the big thing is, as long as you let me know and we're in good communication, if you're a little late, and I use the word little for anyone that's listening that I work with, little late, I'm cool with it because you let me know. I can make compensations. I can work on something else to give you an extra couple days and move those things around. Otherwise, it's just a conversation. Because, for instance, Neil knows he's working on history. I might say, "Hey, Neil, I want an extra couple thousand words. These are the big bullet points I want you to hit. And if you have questions, ask me. If not, these are some good resources to look into." And then I let him go. Because if people have questions, they'll come back and ask. But if not, they're crafting their own thing. And I want everyone to be a part of this thing that we're doing. It's just not mine. This is ours because we're a team.
That's really cool. So you keep the information, you divide up your assignments, you keep the information open and honest, and you let everybody sort of tack on ideas. And then as long as people hit their due dates, it's all good. It sounds like that's a great collaborative environment. I really like that.
And one of the things I've started really doing is I have preliminary red lines, so if I tell you that I need something in 2 months, I might ask to see the first 4,000 words in a month. I don't care if they're rough, if they're not edited, but it gives me an idea of where you're going. And if you're going in a direction that doesn't necessarily vibe with what we started with, I can say, "Hey, maybe think about doing these 2 or 3 things." And that comes early enough that you can go, "Okay, I see where we're going to go different steps. Let me shift this." And that makes all the back end edits easier on both of us.
What about action? Gumshoe games vary widely, I think, in the way they do action. Sometimes you have Knights Black Agents where you're like kicking in the door and shooting up a bunch of vampires like you're a big badass super spy. And then sometimes, the games are a little bit more laid back, a little bit more gritty, realistic, that sort of thing. Where would you say Harlem Unbound falls in that scale? And what are some of your inspirations for action scenes?
We are definitely on the more grittier scale because I'm not using any of the Nice Black Agents sort of stuff or Pulp Cthulhu rules in V1. And so you're just a person. You might be a little bit smarter, maybe a little bit stronger, a little bit more skilled. But if you're shot and it hurts. 1 or 2 bullets, you're dead. If you run up against a Shoggoth, you're crushed. So it's more thinking your way around problems.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. That was definitely my interpretation too of the rules. Was it felt more, like I said, on the mortal end of the Cthulhu spectrum.
All that said, though, because I say that just so I could disagree with myself. In the Harlem Hellfighters Never Die scenario, it deals with a bunch of World War I vets coming back, and part of that is very much sort of a combat-ish adventure that deals with. So as a veteran, one of the big things for me is I want to shine a light on other African American veterans because they've fought in almost every single war for this country in horrible situations and frequently turned away because they were considered to be cowardice. And I want to show history that is true and accurate compared to what's being shown. And part of that dealt with repercussions from World War I coming back and having to deal with that. So that's an action-y adventure.
Yeah, that's really, the fact that the system is flexible enough to allow for that is a really good thing. And when you're talking about thinking your way around puzzles, some Cthulhu games sort of have the built-in assumption that, like, at the end of this adventure, my character is either going to be dead or crazy. Does this have that assumption? Or if you think about things and think your way through, do you have a shot at making it out alive?
It follows more of my own principle that there's always hope. It may not be a lot of hope. It could be the faintest flame of hope. But if you don't have hope, it makes the entire adventure and scenario pointless because you're automatically going to die and there's no reason to really be doing it. Even in Lovecraft stories, everyone says it's utterly hopeless. It's not utterly hopeless. Otherwise, the protagonist wouldn't be struggling on. Even if he was suddenly trapped in his wife's buried body under the ground, he wouldn't like force his way out to go warn his friend about something. He would have given up and just died. Like there has to be a glimmer of hope. And for me, one of my longest characters I ever had was in a Call of Cthulhu game. It ran for about 5 or 6 years, and I had the same character from when we started to when we ended.
Wow. That's an achievement. That is really something. What was that character like by the end of that?
It was missing an arm, maybe part of a leg, and running around with 6 sanity when the campaign ended, but it was the same character.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really incredible. When we're talking about New York and Harlem, during the Harlem Renaissance, is there anything there that relates very well to the Cthulhu mythos being, a more secret thing, that your characters are stumbling upon these things that are massive, world shattering, right? Like change your entire perspective of the world when you trip over a deep one. How is that dealt with in the context of the Harlem Renaissance?
There's just so many parts of New York that's like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many of them, it's hard to just sort of narrow it down to one specific thing.
Sure. Well, you could talk about New York in general too, if you wanted to.
Because even when my wife and I went up to Harlem last year, even though there is a lot of that history and past being erased, even just walking down the streets, it still sort of has that, I'm not going to say noir feel, but there's a feel of history. And as you're walking through it, there's sort of a shiver that can even run down your spine walking down a random street in the middle of the day, because the way the sun hits a random building that's there from 80 years ago. And that sort of like floods you with ideas. Like it could be ghosts in the house. It could be a buried person in the wall beneath the bowels of it that's sort of still like preaching out to someone else to come get them free. There's just too much. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all. So I sort of want to talk to you about a thread I saw that you had on Twitter a few weeks ago, where you were sort of discussing the number of copies Harlem Unbound had sold and recognition and things like that, and about the role-playing game industry in general being a kind of hard place to make a name. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more, just sort of making your way in the role-playing game industry in general.
That goes back to a lot of who you know and larger companies. There's a lot of great independent developers and designers and game makers out there doing incredible work that no one else sees because they don't have enough of a presence. There's no one retweeting them. There's no one talking about them. And you may have a great idea and you love it and you try to share it to everyone, but after a while, that burden of not getting any sort of recognition for it sort of sours you on it, and then you just kind of give up and you go away, or you try to do something else. And someone may discover your work years later, but by that point in time, that window of opportunity has passed. So it goes back to all of us needing to do everything we can to promote other people's work. I know, for instance, for me, if the Kickstarter wasn't so successful, and it's only because of social media, and I could engage with all the backers of the Kickstarter, and they went out and they engaged with other people. That is the only way that people know about who I was. I remember watching my Twitter account when I first started, and when I got to 50 followers, we celebrated. Because that was huge. Because I was a guy trying to do something to make a game in this industry where there's luminaries who do amazing work, and wherever they go, that's who people look for. And if no one's heard of you and they haven't heard of you and they have no way to figure out who you are, there's no way for them to contact you about work. And so the same people keep getting all the work, and it's harder and harder to sort of break that mold. And one of the problems is, even if you break that mold, you've got one shot and you don't know how to engage with people in the same way that people that have done it repetitively have.
Yeah. It is so hard to sort of figure out a way to get people to look at your stuff or give you a chance when it's like, well, I haven't heard of you. And it's like, well, you wouldn't have heard of me because I didn't get a chance to do anything. Well, yeah. Well, you know what I mean? Like, it's that sort of breaking that cycle, I think is really hard, which is why you see so many people starting blogs or self-publishing or that kind of thing. And then of course people respond back with like, well, this is just homebrew. I don't know why I would ever use this. So we get into that situation, which is always lovely.
That's what I had to do because I actually took Harlem Unbound. I shopped it around to a lot of different companies, and a lot of people said, that's a great idea, but it's not really our brand. We don't think it'll sell. And so you just have to eventually decide if you want to try to do it yourself. And doing it yourself is a scary thing, but if it's something you believe in, it's what you have to do.
That's right. And then eventually, Chaosium comes knocking. So there you go. There it is. The two-step plan to profiting in role-playing games.
Very, very meager profits.
Yeah.
Enough to make book
Definitely.
2.
Right. Exactly. So this is awesome, and Harlem Unbound is great, and you are great. If people want to know more about you and what you do, where can they go and what should they do?
The best bet is to look for Dark Horse Studios on Twitter, or you could look for me on Patreon to support me in my random blog post and occasional drops of nuggets into what I'm up to, or the very undercared for website, darkerhuestudios.com.
Excellent. And we will link all of that over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And maybe we can get together one day at Gen Con and play some games. That would be awesome.
First round's on me.
Wow, that was an awesome interview. You could give Tabletop Babble a free holiday gift right now. It's not going to cost you anything to head on over to iTunes, create an account, and leave us a 5-star review. Seriously, even if you're not using iTunes to listen to this podcast, odds are your podcatcher app is using iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to others. So go do that. Rate us, rate all of the other podcasts you love. And if you leave us a 5-star review, I will read it out loud and credit the person who left it. You can make me say anything you want. People, I am on Twitter at James Introcaso, and follow my work, worldbuilderblog.com. Plus, if you like me and you like this show, you are definitely going to want to check out Tabletop Voices, which is another amazing one-on-one interview show where I talk to creators, just like I talked to Chris for this. It's pretty much the same exact thing, so you're going to want to check that out. And you should also check out The Demon Plague. It's a 5th edition actual play that I am DMing with a group of amazing players. So go check that out at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on that very Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. Sometimes you're just too exhausted. Hey everybody, just wanted to let you know that this podcast was brought to you by Kobold Press. Kobold Press are the makers of fine third-party game products. I'm talking about Deep Magic, I'm talking about the Tome of Beasts, the Midgard campaign setting, and the Creature Codex, and of course now 12 Peculiar Towers, a collection of 5th edition D&D adventures for characters level 1 to 13 with the theme of towers. Discover the mysteries that lie within a forest lair of a Ravenfolk bandit gang, a magical archive of ancient elven lore, the hideout of a powerful thieves guild master, and the stronghold of a sinister blood mage. Plus, there's 8 other distinctive dungeons. Each tower comes with a beautifully illustrated map, including many isometric maps, and of course, there's plenty of traps, hazards, and enemies to challenge your players. You can get 12 Peculiar Towers in print and PDF today at koboldpress.com.